So whether you work in a large business or a small business, mental health is a really big topic right at the moment. And why? Because during COVID, we've all been working at home, we're more isolated, and so mental health particularly has gained a much greater focus. This week, we're talking to an expert in mental health, Ali Kelly, who's the CEO of Mind Blank, and that's coming right up. So the last year or so has been particularly difficult, I think, in the workplace with the added pressures of COVID and homeschooling for people working from home. What I thought we would do this week is talk to an expert on mental health. And Ali's with us today. And Ali, you're the CEO of, what's the name of the organisation?
Mind Blank. We're a mental health promotion charity.
That's great. So we have exactly the right person to talk about mental health with us today. So some people might be watching this and thinking, oh, look, I totally get it. You know, stress in the workplace and you know, where can that go? Other people will be sort of sitting there thinking, oh, you know, people complain too much. But it's serious, isn't it? What are some of the things that we should be looking out for in the workplace? And you know, how can stress then develop into much more serious things?
Look, this conversation I'm sure I could spend hours speaking on because mental health can present in various different shapes, forms, different sectors are dealing with different pressures. I think let's just go back to how you introduced it. Over the last year or so, what have we actually been experiencing? And thankfully, mental health is now in the conversation that is raised. Some level of stigma has dropped, so we are actually having active conversations about it. But what we've found is a stressor, regardless of the workplace, just as human beings, a stressor is dealing with change, and the whirlwinds of change that COVID-19 has brought has been hitting us left, right and centre. So some common experiences that people may have witnessed themselves or within their networks is the increase of stress and anxiety. So when COVID-19 first came about, what we found is the panic set in. You would have seen symptoms of that through the panic buying and levels of uncertainty and not knowing what to do when the entire world was removing themselves and isolating in their own home environment. So part of that panic is fight or flight, and it's actually quite a common response, that level of anxiety, dealing with change, dealing with uncertainty. But what happens is when we're adjusting well to that level of change, we will then go into a level of homeostasis where we retreat, we balance. You know, people may have found with time to help cope, they may be switching themselves off to the news because there's too many updates that are stressing and worrying and we can't control it all. So they've found their balance by shutting off screen time. That's actually a sign that you're adjusting well to change. And once that phase passes, you've got routine kicking in. So although we're all of a sudden working remotely or working with different living environments, we're starting to cope and go back to what are some routines that are normal for us all. So someone that's not necessarily coping with that though, stays on that fight or flight mode. And one image you can possibly picture in your head is, imagine a treadmill and it's on the highest state. So the reason I'm using the treadmill example is a lot of businesses and workplaces are still on that treadmill, because what we're doing is there's the economy that's a little bit uncertain right now. We're trying to catch up. For all this lost time, there's increased workloads everywhere. There's change going to and from lockdowns. There's uncertain economic environments. If businesses stay on this treadmill, they will find themselves fast tracking that track to burnout 3 times higher risk than those that are stepping off the treadmill and actually being proactive about early intervention strategies when it comes to mental health. So why is it important that workplace mental health is addressed? First of all, it starts with the fact that we're all individuals. You don't know what your staff member could be going through behind closed doors. Work health and safety policies say that it is the workplace's responsibility to take care of psychological hazards when it comes to their staff members. But what we're actually finding within our organisation is many workplaces focus on the crisis end. So they may have an EAP service, which is a counselling service for their staff if staff are presenting with mental health symptoms. But often what we've found is they've neglected the prevention planning. And without prevention planning and early intervention strategies to create a wellness culture, what you're going to find is they'll be reactionary to ignoring some of the build-up that could be happening for their staff and then dealing with crisis instantly. And that's what we're actually seeing both in workplaces as well as with individuals. Human nature, we wait until it's too late before we seek help. You know, there's all these signs that our bodies give us to tell us that our stress and pressure may be increasing. We may see signs of, for example, headaches forming, or little early warning signs that we really need to pay attention to, because the earlier we pay attention to some of these symptoms, the sooner we can go towards that support pathway for help, and the sooner we can actually go back to that level of homeostasis. If we actually ignore these early warning signs, what happens is that they will get worse, and our body will try even harder to show signs that we actually need help. And often we've used anxiety, so I'll use the example of a panic attack. That panic attack happens because the body is actually desperate to get you to pay attention to your well-being. And what's actually happening when someone experiences a panic attack is the brain's actually shutting down and rebooting itself. So it feels like you're grasping for air because it's desperate to get some oxygen back into your brain. So a panic attack is actually a relatively harmless symptom, but what it's actually telling you is your brain and your whole body is actually forcing you to pay attention to your well-being.
Wow. So listening to you there, Ali, I'm thinking there are probably different groups of people watching this, and
Yes.
you know, in my layman's sort of mind, I'm thinking, well, those working in large corporates probably have a degree of support around them. They've got, you know, workmates sort of keeping an eye on them. What about people working at home and sort of small business owners and entrepreneurs, you know, running their own businesses from home? Are they more at risk? Are we seeing a higher incidence of, you know, serious mental illness?
Yeah, look, interesting question and perspective, so thanks for calling that out. I do agree with you that corporates, like larger businesses, may actually have some structures in place, but watch out for that corporate culture, because sometimes that push of the treadmill being too busy can sometimes create some toxic environments for individuals as well as the workplace. But when it comes to small businesses or business owners, entrepreneurs, they are certainly more at risk of developing mental health issues just because of the nature of the role in what they do. In terms of where we sit now, it is actually predicted in the health space that the next wave of the pandemic will be the psychological one. Wow. So if anything, knowing that we are dealing with change and uncertainty, business owners, small businesses, doing things to equip now before it gets too busy or too extreme for them can certainly help provide some support from them. And some early intervention strategies are so simple that it goes over people's head. So an example of a very first step.
Give us three. Come on, give us three.
Oh, I can certainly give you three. But the very first step is know your signs and symptoms, right?
Okay.
And that should already be second nature, but start to pay attention to what signs could be telling you that this stress level is not okay, because that's the very first step to knowing what to do next. Something else that you can do to help prevent is often a big corporate may actually have a team leader or someone responsible for well-being on team. For these smaller businesses, they may not have that structure. However, it's really important to know who they can go to just talk it out. A psychological hazard could present, having someone to chat to can help you debrief, and verbalizing it gets it off your chest, and it is actually a really helpful coping strategy. So if you've got such a small team that you don't necessarily have someone in your team that you can go to in that role, then there are some government services, like particularly with COVID-19, there's free helplines, for example, and there's lots of business support for small businesses and medium businesses during this time.
Right.
It's also helpful sometimes not necessarily to go to your direct network in the workplace. Sometimes individuals as coping strategies may identify their tribe of people around them that may have nothing to do with their business. There's just someone that they can actually have a chat to unload some of that pressure.
Okay.
My third tip, though, is avoid accidental counselling. So for those that don't know what accidental counselling is, it's, in basic terms, it's when you accidentally become a counsellor, right?
Yes.
Someone comes to you and they've got some serious
well-meaning,
problems.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I know. So they come to you and they have some serious problems and they unload.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you're not a mental health professional, you're not going to help that individual by filling those shoes of a health professional. So it becomes counterproductive of the person that needs help as well as for you, because you end up walking away with the stress and pressure of the workload from that individual. Yeah. So ways to not become an accidental counsellor: if someone comes to you and discloses what's actually going on, go back to spotting the signs. So I see that you're worried, you're more stressed, you've been taking on, start to list what you see in them. So it could be physical signs of, I can hear you've told me you're not sleeping well, So share that you're worried about them and encourage intervention. So what that means is encourage them to actually take that step to seek help if they may need it. It's not your job to call that helpline or to book them into the doctor on their behalf, but it's your job at least as that first point of call to recommend that, they may actually need some professional help and that you can't necessarily be there to fill those shoes.
That's a great tip. And what about, the amount of remote working that we're doing now? So again, thinking of business owners, particularly smaller business owners, they might have a lot of remote staff. Does that add complications, looking out for people's well-being?
Yeah, it's so interesting how remote working, people were doing it before COVID-19, but then we were all forced to do it all of a sudden. And what's interesting with work health and safety law is a lot of businesses, if they have staff working from home, may have a checklist to identify the staff office and see if there's any trip hazards. But what I've found is many don't have a checklist to check on that staff member's well-being. Do they really know what that individual circumstance is? Because isolation is a real risk for the remote workers. And what I've witnessed working with workplaces during this time is that whatever your culture was pre this lockdown phase, it's only going to be the same, or if anything worse, in terms of some of the gaps of your policies will be highlighted during this time. So for those that may have whirlwinded or be too small to be too proactive about creating manuals and policies in this space, there's certainly some helpful things you can do to check in on your staff members for remote working. The common ones we see is the simple team catch-ups with the videos on, so that everyone can at least witness and share a face at the end of the day. There's also ones that I found is a buddy system. So if you know that you've got a remote worker, at the end of the day, make sure that if anything else, they've got at least one person to talk to, because you don't know what that person's going through. And sometimes something as simple as that, connecting them with a buddy that just when they're clocking off, they can do a quick check-in. That could be the first time they've actually chatted to someone that day. You don't really know, Some other common issues that I've found with remote working, checking on mental well-being is what happens if they are not turning up to these team meetings, or they don't show their camera, or, you are starting to see signs that they may be unwell, but it's much harder to connect with people than if you're in the office in the next cubicle and you can kind of front up to it. So that would, an example of what to do there would fall back on the business to see if they do have any mental health policies that have to follow suit with that. Ideally, it's great that if follow the same steps I mentioned before. If you are finding you're concerned with an individual, spot the signs, share that you may be worried about them, share that there are some intervention steps that they could take. And if they do reach out to you and reveal more, it's still very much your step to encourage that you're not necessarily a mental health professional if you haven't got those skills, but there are certainly some mental health professionals you can connect them with.
No, that's some great insights, Ali. I can see that we could talk about this all day, but maybe for those watching this, we could put a few links down below. So we could put a link to your organisation. I mean, we're filming in this in Australia. I think you provided me a couple of helplines here. We'll put those in. Maybe people watching this, if you're not in Australia, you could contribute some helplines in your country as well. So
that would be fantastic.
That would be great. We must talk about this some more, and I think we've been talking about mental health in the workplace today. I know you do a lot of work with youth and teenagers and so on as well. It would be really great to catch up and talk about that too, for some of the things for people to watch out for.
Yeah, fantastic.
So Ali Kelly, CEO of Mind Blank. Excellent talking to you today. Some fantastic insights, some really practical tips. Thank you so much for joining us, Ali.
Great. Thank you for the invite, Rob.